The Utopian Seed Project presents Southeast Seed. Enormous thanks to this episode's presenting sponsor, Safan.
How adventurous are you?
You want me to eat them? Yeah.
They're good even raw, seriously. Like, trust me, please.
Today, we're going to talk about Southern peas.
Hello. I am eating a bean.
Yeah, so these were,
It's a delicious bean.
here's another one.
So, what's the difference between a bean and a pea? Well, it depends a bit on your framing. As we'll see, the names that we use to describe these crops are somehow simultaneously both too vague and too specific. Southern peas are usually more drought-tolerant and can thrive in poorer soil than most bean varieties, but saving bean seed and pea seed is so similar that often farmers choose not to differentiate between them.
Most people ask me, not peas and beans, like what are these major differences and all that kind of stuff. I was like, well, you know, it's been kind of like, they ain't the same family.
They are a legume. They're in the legume family of crops, but botanically they are not peas. That's just that's a very southern thing. I'm not sure like where it came from that southern peas were started to be called peas. Definitely in the legume family. They are not the same genus as our common pole or bush beans or English peas, anything like that.
For the most part, with them being all in kind of like the same family, I kind of treat it as the same plant, because otherwise I'd have to go and find something that's about bean seed production and find something about pea production. Now I got to read both, and they're both going to say the same thing.
Right. The Latin name for southern peas is Vigna unguiculata, a totally different genus from common beans, Phaseolus vulgaris, or from peas, Pisum sativum. So, although we think of all of these different plants as beans, they're not actually terribly closely related, which can be a boon for seed savers concerned about isolation distances. You can grow lots of different kinds of legumes together without having to worry about whether they'll interbreed.
In that sense, it makes them quite easy to save seed because as long as you're not growing another type of southern pea, they're not going to cross with your beans or your regular English peas. Isolation distance for southern peas is going to be approximately 50 feet.
What we want to make sure of is that we have enough space so that there is never a possibility of cross-pollination.
If you really want to be super careful and absolutely make sure that this variety that you're growing is going to stay very true to type, I would give it a good 100 feet. But that's still pretty doable in most people's gardens.
The reason why isolation distances for southern peas are so small is because they have perfect flowers. Perfect here in the Latin sense of complete. They have both male and female parts in the same place, and they often use those parts to pollinate themselves.
It's called self-pollinating because it has a perfect flower. So with the male and female parts in each flower, they're not as reliant on external insects to carry pollen from one to the other. And that can mean that just even a healthy wind can shake the flower enough that the pollen will fall deeper into the flower, which is what makes the pollination happen. There are pollinators that come visit them, but it's not 100% necessary. I rarely have poor pollination on them. I think they in general are visited by enough native bees and wind that they produce quite well.
Southern peas are often touted as some of the easiest crops to grow. Not only do they pollinate reliably, but they're adapted to nutrient-poor soils and they fix nitrogen, so they're often used as a cover crop and they compete with weeds quite well.
They're pretty easy to grow and they grow fast, so that they're pretty competitive with weeds.
Easier to grow, where you just throw them out in the field and they pop up in no time.
I love southern peas because they're super easy to grow, like just insanely easy to grow.
I love peas. I do.
I really enjoy growing beans, but they're not always the easiest seed crop to grow here because of the humidity.
Southern peas are very easy to grow. They're more drought tolerant and less susceptible to pests than most other legumes, but in the southeast, harvesting them can be temperamental. The same fresh pea seed that we like to eat so much is also very appealing to various types of fungus and molds, which will take advantage of cool, wet weather to rot your entire seed crop. So the timing of southern pea harvests needs to be very specific.
Well, generally speaking, any dry-seeded plant, you want to harvest it during dry weather, or as dry as you're going to get during a certain period of time.
We wait until the bean pod is leathery, where the stem and the top of the pod come together. It's not dry or hard and can be like a pale yellow, not brown yet, but not totally green either.
Noticing when it's mature enough that you can harvest it. You know, if the weather's dry, you can leave them on and let them fully dry on the plant.
I allow the peas to dry on the vine and then pretty much just snap them right off.
But as you go into fall, you tend to have periods of rain.
If I see that there's going to be 3 days of rain, we're going to get out there and harvest as much of it as we possibly can.
Getting it off before a rain, making sure you get out there and harvest them before rain sets in.
Bring it into the driest area we can possibly put it in and let it finish drying like that.
And that's important because if you're trying to save seeds for yourself or trying to sell seeds, you want to have good high germ seed that doesn't have a lot of fungal or bacterial issues.
I have in the past also not been fast enough. If I don't get out there and aren't paying attention to what's going on, you may walk out there and all of a sudden have something that's paper thin but is moldy.
That's what I was looking for, to pick them off. I see what you're saying. Yes.
Paper thin, and then when you get ready to open like the actual pod itself, all this fuzziness is on the inside and you're like,
Because these are not healthy. These seeds are not healthy.
oh shoot, but from the outside it looks so good.
The middle pod is perfect. It's like just a little crispy when you touch it.
Because mold will come in, you won't even be able to tell it. So that's kind of like right at the stage where it's kind of quit growing and it's starting to dry, and you can hurry up and get it off of there before the mold kind of gets to it.
So I go out and check. It's not like I just go out and go, oh, we're gonna get sun tomorrow. I'm not gonna worry about it. I'll literally go out and go around and pull some of the peas and just see, you know, when I pull it open, is there a lot of water that comes out or is there a lot of moisture inside?
They set peas over a period of time. You're better off harvesting them as soon as they begin to dry.
Then that kind of like puts me in that thing of like, I gotta get these in, I gotta get them around, I gotta get the fan blowing on it, and I need the air, and I don't mean like a cool fan, I mean like a fan with a little bit of heat behind it. You don't want to lose something like that by you saying, I don't have time. Yeah. And when you're a farmer, I think that's the other thing, you gotta really look at what you're growing and the time span that it takes to get there. You always have to pay attention to something that everybody else takes for granted. So I actually start looking at the weather pattern for this 2 weeks before, because I'm looking at the weather pattern and I'm checking the bean. Yeah. Weather pattern, checking the bean. Because there's so many factors. All these things are part of farming. You can't do one without the other. Like you can't just put the crop out there and be like, well, it's good. Like you gotta nurture.
So it takes some nurturing and careful attention to the weather to ensure that the pea crop that you spent all season growing doesn't get eaten by mold. One thing that can help with this, especially if you're growing at scale, is a good drying system.
Those are some nice racks.
That's where I do the drying.
I love them.
If you buy a 4-foot wide roll, 1/4-inch hardware cloth, and you buy, these are 1x4s. I'll put one of these down on the floor, but this is just regular screen wire, because beans will sometimes pop out, and that way they don't go all the way through. They're just to lay it on top. And then they're weighted with these. Then I'll do another one, and then I'll do another one. My best guess on the number of seed pods here is about 65,000. I let them dry on the vine to a large degree, which is always tricky because you don't want them to get wet. After they're fully dried, you don't want them to get wet because then they'll germinate in the pod. And then it goes through that sheller that I made over there.
Once the peas are dry, they need to be shelled. And we'll look at some shelling machines in a bit. But the simplest way to do it is by hand.
You get to peeling them, I know when I first started, it was just like, get it all clean, get all the peas out there, right? And then I got to where we got a little more intentional about how we were cleaning them and looking at them. I don't have a shucker. I don't have a sheller. Right? So I had somebody a while back go, wait. Just like you look like, wait. You're talking half an acre of peas by hand. I'm like, yeah, all done by hand. Well, I do it in the evening. I think that's the other thing. Yeah. And more of a part of like, I'm watching TV. Okay, I'm doing, okay, yep. This needs to go over here. This goes in my little pile.
Shelling by hand may seem unnecessarily laborious, but it's by no means infeasible. And one of the advantages of processing by hand is that it provides an opportunity to select for the very best beans and to rogue out off types.
So what I have in this hand is Sea Island red peas that came all out of the same set of pods. We see how this one right here, it's smaller, yes. However, I don't know if it's just smaller as it did not mature, or if this is some genetic modification that just happened and now we have a white red pea or a white pea. However, I do know that there are Sea Island white peas. So I don't want this to end up with these as I'm getting ready to plant Sea Island red peas, because I want this pea, not this pea. So I think that that's one of the kind of things of like, are we going to eat it or are we going to seed save for it? And so I try to make sure that peas look the same.
So shelling by hand can allow you to maintain a consistent crop year after year. But if you don't want to inspect each and every pea, there are some simple machines that can do much of the work for you.
There's some rocks and so forth, and here,
Change rocks.
and it beats the seed out of the holes. It's charged up with beans and rocks and chains. Back on here. This is a dryer. This is a belt out of a dryer.
Okay.
Just a regular clothes dryer. And so when you turn this on, I load up the sheller and then I'll let it run while I do other things.
Mm-hmm. You run it for half an hour?
Yeah, I run it for about a half an hour. I am rushing it a little bit, but it's just intuition. It's, I don't know, are these dry enough? Can I,
What'll smash them best?
Try it, see what,
Yeah.
see if it's smashing them. See, that's just powdered pods is what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And the seed cleaner will take that out. You want to try it?
There are a lot of different ways to thresh southern peas. I'm particularly partial to machines that use random rocks as core components. They'll smash your pods real good. And once they're smashed, the residue needs to be cleaned away. One of the simpler ways to do this is to pass your peas and chaff over the airflow of a common box fan. The air will blow the lighter chaff away, leaving just the peas behind, but this method is not the most controlled. So, for more fine-grained winnowing, some seed savers will build their own seed cleaning devices.
You pour the seed in here. This is a shop vac. It's pulling air so that seeds falling down, and all these little triangles cause what's falling through to be beaten back and forth. Mm-hmm. And so the air coming up, the light stuff, goes out this way. It cleans this, and it cleans it pretty well. But there's a Brit guy who published plans for this online.
Yeah.
And that's where this came from. And I have run a mountain of seed.
It's got little bits of...
It's got bits of this, that, and the other.
Yeah, and then when it comes out, it's just seeds.
So that's how you save southern peas. The trickiest bit by far is making sure that they don't mold or sprout in the pods. Monitoring moisture in the southeast is critical, but the rest of the process is quite simple, and it's been passed down through generations of southern families.
There are historical references of folks who, in the South, who would grow their family's southern pea and guarded the peas with their lives because they tasted so good. There's a lot of bean varieties that are very specific to certain hollers, to certain families. It's so interesting to have this history that is unverifiable but oral enough that we know it's got to be at least have one full foot in fact. I think the fantastic storytelling of seed keeping is often what keeps people keeping seed.
Let's dive into a story now of a very particular pea from a place called Sapelo Island.
You got
peas. Beautiful little red peas. So these were Geechigella peas that were originally brought over from West Africa. These came from John Jackson. This is Sapelo Island peas.
I received them from Matthew Rayford, who's an amazing human being, one of my mentors, and I grow those in honor of him, our heritage, and continue to tell stories of our ancestors.
These specific ones right here actually come from the late Miss Corinne Bale. And so she was, she's like the mother of Sapelo Island, one of the last elders that just passed here recently in Trenton. And so this stock comes directly from her, all of her family from West Africa till now. And so we've been growing that pea.
Sapelo Island is a nearby island?
Yeah, so
Like
Sapelo,
a Georgia coast
yeah,
island?
Sapelo Island is from where the Geechee Gullah culture is. So over in Georgia coast, where the former slaves who settled on that island never left that island. They've been there ever since, and these were the peas that they've developed on that island that they call Sapelo Island. And that is food from our ancestors right there.
I really think about the old ways. Like a lot of the things that we're doing now and trying to name now are things that my great-grandparents did, and my great-great-grandparents did, and my great-grandparents, and my grandparents. So we're talking 4 or 5 generations of like me hearing these things.
They've been growing that variety on Sapelo Island for, since they arrived here on American shores. And so those Red Island sea peas, or Sapelo Island Red Island sea peas, were developed by just the Geechee Gullah culture. Is their pea.
My mom's family is Gullah Geechee. Her lineage is we're actually on the land that we're on right now. I am the 6th generation to have planted, harvested, and eaten from a crop off of this land. And this also has been one of the peas that have been here for probably about 40 years. We've grown this in some shape, size, or whatever. I'm the generation now to actually be back on the farm to actually push on it much harder. And I remember when I went to Miss Bailey and was like, can you show me how to grow this pea? I've watched my ancestors plant and do things. I watched my Nana plant, my great-grandmother. I've watched all these folks.
The sign that says Sea Island Red, is that another name for the same thing?
Yeah, so you can't call them Sapelo Island red peas unless they're on Sapelo Island. Kind of like Vidalia.
Okay.
So we don't technically, we really refer to them as Sea Island Reds. You know what I mean? And so
when you sell them as Sea Island Red.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Even though they came from Sapelo Island. You know what I mean? And I think that's good. If you want Sapelo Island red peas, then go to Sapelo Island, right?
It's like champagne or whatever.
So the Sapelo Island red pea gets its name from a highly specific history of place, and from the people who have saved it since they came to the island hundreds of years ago. And yet, the history of the pea stretches back further than Sapelo Island to a point where its highly specific identity begins to blur.
I ran into some Guyanese folks one time and I was talking about Sea Island red peas, and they were like, I've eaten that before. That's like a normal pea. They're just like, I'm talking about Sea Island red peas, and they're like, I grew up eating this pea, but that wasn't the name. And I was like, what was the name? They was like, it's just a red pea. It's just actually it's not even red. It's more brownish red, clay red, and I was like, oh. I talk about it as though it's Sea Island red peas and from whence they came for me. But then when I go into explaining that, like, you do know, like in most of the places that we move, it's just rice. And so I think that we have gotten into this thing of, hey, it's got to have a name and it's got to look like this to be able to call it something. That's just not the way the diaspora works. The diaspora works more on like the conversation about what it is and where it came from and all of that. And
how you use it.
And how you use it.
Seed companies need seeds to have names in order to sell them, in order to tell a compelling story to customers that will allow them to differentiate between one kind of pea and another. But the Sapelo Island red pea doesn't need to be called that in order to exist. It evolved over centuries of interactions between farmers and plants, first in Africa, then in America, and that history often can't be reflected in a variety name.
These are Crowder beans, also called Southern peas, and these are cowpeas, and then these are snow peas.
Everybody thinks in terms of black-eyed peas or cowpeas, and not understanding that with over 3,000 tribes in Africa, they all have their own type of pea.
Don't you have any cool ones coming to you from Africa?
With the cool ones is they have no names. They're just beans. So it's like, and then do I create a name for this now bean that I got from, or do I just kind of call it a bean like they do? And I could write it in there or create a story, and I may do that. So if you get a Carter black-eyed pea, just know that was probably me.
Okay. But the problem you have is just like it's hard to sell something for seed when you can't give it like a recognizable variety name.
Well, not necessarily the problem per se, just the, I've yet to desire to kind of colonize or tell the story of some of those plants that are just kind of basic there.
I've heard of Crowder peas called cowpeas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I've seen people look at the smaller like red bean and call it a field pea. Yeah. And I'm always like, okay, field pea, southern pea, aren't those like all in the same, kind of like family, kind of a thing?
I'll just get it from the market. I'll get a lunka of black-eyed peas, a lunka of ground nuts, peanuts, and grow those out. But most of them then just don't have a name attached to them. They're just beans. So we'll grow some beans.
A lot of times people get all caught up in the name and all those kinds of things. And when I look across right here, for me, these are all southern peas.
The first written reference to the name cowpeas comes from a white American writer in 1798, and they were called cowpeas then because they were grown primarily as animal fodder, and those were the peas that enslaved Africans were allowed to grow and save. Did they call them cowpeas? Almost certainly not. Names contain stories, and they often tell us more about who does the naming than about the plants themselves. And if we look back to a time before colonization and before enslavement, we often find that the most important varieties were the ones which had no names. They were just beans that were so intertwined with a place and culture that everyone knew what they were, regardless of what they were called. Those are the crops that have been sustaining us for generations.
And I've started transitioning to more of the obscure varieties, mostly because I want to save them for future generations. When I think about especially the rare native seed varieties, like millennia of farming mothers before me saved those so that our children would know these seeds.
They say, what's the proverb? A man does not plant an orchard for himself, he plants it for his children's children's children. My children's children's children will be able to say, oh yeah, my great 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 granddaddy was farming this pea. The story behind that is there was someone that did bean or pea production and seed saving that allowed for that to happen.
The reason we even have food to this day is because all those people whose hands we don't even know they pass through, is the reason we have food here.
That way you have something to pass on, and it's self-determination is why I like saving seeds. It's one of the most powerful things you can do, and giving someone else the power and the knowledge to be able to save their own seeds and take control of their own food source there's nothing that feels better than that.
Plants pass on their genes to their seeds, and farmers pass on their seeds to their children. Seeds are one of our oldest inheritances. Fewer people save seeds today than a generation ago, and fewer people saved seeds a generation ago than the generation before that. But there are still seed savers, and our work is as important as it ever was.
We should start asking people, hey, do you have any old bags of seed that might be around that your grandmama or granddaddy had, blah, blah.
Clean your house, clean grandma's house. Find all the nooks and crannies. See if you can find one, because if just one will grow, there's hope, right? It's only recently that you could just I'm just gonna go online and buy seed. I mean, that wasn't always just be able to go online and buy, seeds from any company, anywhere. You had what was available locally, so it's if you want beans next year, you better save these seeds this year. Because, you can trade with your neighbor, but it makes sense. Let a few crops go to seed, get that, and you got your seeds for next year's crop and harvest. So, you're just a lot more tied to the land and the cycle.
The story of the Sapelo Island red pea is the story of a particular pea on a tiny island off the coast of Georgia, and at the same time, it's a story about all peas. All seeds are here because someone saved them. Someone decided that that variety, in particular, was worth keeping. Your grandparents' grandparents saved the seeds that gave rise to the food that you're eating today. What do you want your grandchildren's grandchildren to be eating? Big thanks to our video series sponsors, and thanks to our media sponsors. This project was funded by Southern Pea.